Did you know you can actually find NPCs in the game with purple eyes? Normally all the characters and side characters in the franchise have normal eyes. These purple eyes are one of the most iconic traits of the Cadian shock troops. This striking physical feature is more than just a cosmetic choice. Now, the primary cause of Cadians' purple eyes is their home planet's proximity to the Eye of Terror. Cadia was situated at the only stable warp route of the Eye, known as the Cadian Gate. Now here's the part where things get a bit interesting. Due to the planet being literally at Hell's Gate, the sky was dominated by a swirling purple and pink nebula of a warp. Thousands of years of exposure to this warp taint caused a mutation in the human population, turning their irises into various shades of violet or purple. Well beyond just being another cool visual, the eyes are sometimes associated with a minor resistance to the warp, as it is also hinted in various novels that those with Cadian mutation are slightly more resistant to the maddening whispers of chaos because they were born in the shadow of Eye. Another crazy detail tells that there was a tradition in Cadia where parents would hold their newborns up to face the Eye of Terror in the sky, essentially baptizing them in the sight of their eternal enemy from their very first day. In Warhammer 40k, the Deathwatch pauldron is much more than just a piece of armor for Titus. It is the symbol of his century-long penance and his time as a black shield. Visually, the pauldron is an iconic silver plate of Ordo Xenos. It is engraved with Litany Xeno Mortis. This mind-boggling word actually means that it is a series of anti-Xenos oaths. Some of the words are stylized like High Gothic or Latin in other terms. You can clearly see the words like Xenos, Death, and Exterminatus. Now earlier I used the term Black Shield, but what is the Black Shield? A space marine who has scrubbed his chapter's heraldry to serve in anonymous penance. This was because he felt he brought shame to the Ultramarines after the events of the first game. If you're looking for it after the prologue, you can find it in Titus's quarters on the battle barge Resilient. It's easy to blast through or slice through the hordes of enemies, but you can actually see the exhaust fumes coming from your weapons. This detail is not just for cosmetic purposes. You see, they are integrated into tactile heat management that reflects the brutal mechanical nature of Astartes weaponry. The game uses thermal storytelling to let you know how far your weapon is from failure, which in my opinion is actually such a cool and genius detail. Thermal storytelling works in different ways, like barrel glow, which occurs when the barrel of a heavy bolter or a pyre cannon transitions from cold gunmetal to dull orange, eventually becoming a bright hot glow when you reach maximum fire rate. High heat weapons generate a visible shimmer around the barrel, distorting the air and making it hard to aim while firing the weapons. In Space Marines 2, the Tyranids don't just use guns, they use bioweapons that use flesh borers. And yes, it's shooting living frenzy-biting flesh borers at you, and if that wasn't horrifying enough for you, then you can actually use the photo mode and see this living weapon has a visible blinking eye on a horrific device attached to it. You'll also notice that the Tyranids never reload. This is because their weapons grow ammo, because you have a literal brood nest inside you. So, the beetles are constantly being born and matured inside the weapon chamber. The Tyranids are likened to a galactic swarm consuming everything in its path, feeding on entire worlds and leaving only dead husks in their wake. Their threat is such that an unprotected planet can be infested and stripped clean of all of its organic material in a matter of solar weeks without even slowing down the advance of the Hive fleet. The Tyranids are unlike any other intelligent species encountered by humanity. They are also the ultimate predators. To them, all living things, from the lowliest insect to the most advanced starfaring civilization, are mere prey. Only now are the inhabitants of the galaxy realizing the scale of the threat. Unless the Tyranids can be stopped, it will mean nothing less than the extinction of all life. Now hold on for a sec. If you aren't asleep, feel free to drop a subscription before we move on. There are tons of videos on your favorite games, so why not support us in the process? Alright, let's move on. Cutting and slashing through Xenos and other monsters' bodies can be messy and bloody work. But did you observe that if you trample upon any nearby water body or fountains, your armor gets clean instantly? Pretty much like it just came from the forges. This detail is also known as the Adeptus cleanliness. In Warhammer 40k lore, cleaning armor is not just hygiene, it's a sacred ritual, as the dirt and alien blood is considered an insult to the armor. In the aftermath of a scene, we also learn that Chairon is old as hell. In fact, he's almost 10,000 years old. It's very confusing, but let me explain. In this scene, Chairon says, "I was a boy on Calth when the Worldbearers attacked." This line is the reference to the Battle of Calth, which occurred during the Horus Heresy in the 31st millennium, which is roughly 10,000 years ago. You might be thinking, why does he look so young after all those years? The answer to that is the Primaris project. Chairon was one of the test subjects for Arch-Magos Belisarius Kol's project. They were placed into stasis for 10 millennia while Kol perfected the gene seed. Because Chairon spent 10,000 years on ice, he is not physically aged. He looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, doesn't he? While Space Marines use various weapons, Titus wields a heavy-duty Astartes chainsword, which is also one of my favorite weapons to use in the game. Titus's chainsword is more than just a weapon. It is a storied relic that bridges his past life to his new life. As most fans saw in the first game, Titus used a standard Mark 7 Aquilla pattern chainsword. In the sequel, as a Primaris Marine, his gears have been upgraded to MKX Tacticus standards, making the sword longer, easier to handle, and do more damage while slashing. As mentioned previously, the original Titus's sword from the 2011 game is a secret weapon that can be found mounted on the wall of his personal quarters on the battle barge. The chainsword sports decently high motion value for both its light and heavy attacks, and due to its wide hitbox, you can very easily keep an Astartes alive in the thick of it. That said, the chainsword on its own offers middling damage and range. It does not have the same destructive power of the Thunder Hammer or the range of the Power Fist. It doesn't offer the same level of control as the Power Sword or the unending combo of the knife. The Swarm engine is an in-house game engine developed by Saber Interactives. We've all seen it originally in the massive waves of mindless zombies in World War Z. This engine was already doing crazy work, but Saber Interactives didn't stop there. They made it even crazier by upgrading it for Space Marines 2 for handling a complex multi-layered carpet of Tyranid enemies. You see folks, unlike most game engines processing geometry on CPU before sending it to the GPU, the Swarm engine moves much of this to the GPU, making it able to render thousands of Tyranids with individual animations and textures simultaneously. Now what's even more interesting is that not every Tyranid you see is fully alive. This is because the engine uses a distance-based system, which means that the Tyranids in the far distance are essentially low-cost visual animations in a flock, hence the word carpet used earlier. Now as they get closer, they transition into active AI with pathfinding and physics. Once they engage the player, they become full entities with complex behavior. This engine also gives players dynamic vegetation, meaning it features procedurally generated vegetation that reacts to the swarm's movement, meaning you can actually see the grass and bushes being flattened as the Tyranids rush over them. It does not just end there, because by 2025, Saber developers updated this engine to support advanced upscaling techniques, allowing modes like Performance Mode, giving players a 60 FPS smooth experience, and maintaining higher visual fidelity even during the heaviest swarm sequences. One detail in Space Marine 2 that many players around the world have pointed out is the statue of Sanguinius, the great angel and primarch of the Blood Angels. The statue serves as a major tribute to lore and tabletop hobby. Most of you might know that this statue can be found later in the campaign on planet Demarium, which is an Imperial burial world. As you progress through the ruins of this burial, you will enter a large domed chamber. The statue is impossible to miss as it dominates the center of the hall. The entire room is a shrine to the Blood Angels. You can find murals and walls depicting scenes from the Horus Heresy and the 9th Legion's history, along with the chapter's winged drop heraldry. Now earlier, we used a tabletop reference because the statue is a one-to-one digital creation of the physical Sanguinius miniature, produced by Forge World for the Horus Heresy character series. The statue depicts Sanguinius in midair as he plunges his spear into a dying demon. The developers at Saber Interactives used the actual high-resolution files from the game's workshop to ensure the statue in-game looks exactly like the resin models the collectors buy for their tabletop armies. Well, you don't get your own statue and collector resin models if you're a nobody. You see, Sanguinius is not just another character. In the Warhammer 40k universe, Sanguinius was one of the 20 Primarchs created by the Emperor. His gestation pod was sucked into the warp and landed on Baal Secundus, a moon ravaged by nuclear radiation and inhabited by the mutated cannibals. Unlike his brothers, Sanguinius was born with a physical mutation, a pair of magnificent white functional wings. While the Imperium normally purges mutants, Sanguinius was so perfect in every other way, charismatic, beautiful, and noble, that he was seen as some kind of divine personality instead of being called a freak. He possessed the gift of foresight throughout his life. He was plagued by the vision of the future, the most noticeable of which was the vision of his own death at the hands of his brother, Horus. The tragic story of the Thousand Sons is considered one of the saddest parts in the Warhammer 40k universe. Yes, the Chaos Marines you fight are not just some random bad guys. They are literal ghosts. They have quite a sad backstory as well. Unlike other traitor legions who fell to chaos through greed and spite, the Thousand Sons fell while trying to be the ultimate loyalists. Before the Horus heresy, the Thousand Sons were dying. Because of their psychic potential, their DNA was unstable. They suffered through flesh change, a horrific mutation in which the Marines would spontaneously melt into a mass of tentacles and teeth. The Primarch of the Thousand Sons, Magnus the Red, was desperate to save his sons. He made a bargain with an entity in the warp, was later revealed as Tzeentch, the god of change, to stop the mutation. Well, apparently Tzeentch cured them, but it was a trap. He simply hit a pause button on the mutations, waiting for the moments to let them return. This made the Emperor fearful about the Thousand Sons' reliance on sorcery. At the Council of Nicaea, he issued an edict. Space Marines were forbidden from using psychic powers. This made Magnus think that his father was blinding the Imperium. When Magnus discovered through his visions that Horus had turned traitor, he tried to warn the Emperor. Instead of using a ship, he used a massive psychic ritual to deliver a message directly to Terra. To deliver the message, Magnus smashed through the Imperial Webway, a secret project the Emperor was building. This breach allowed a massive number of demons to flood the basement of the Imperial Palace. In his attempts to save the Emperor, Magnus accidentally crippled his greatest project in the defense of Terra. Now the Emperor, furious and heartbroken, sent Leandros the order that he wanted the Thousand Sons exterminated. By the order of the Emperor, the Space Wolves, aka Executioners, invaded the Thousand Sons and laid waste. Watching his library burn and his son slaughtered, Magnus finally gave in. To save what remained of his legion, he pledged his soul to Tzeentch and teleported the survivors into the Eye of Terror. As the survivors went inside the warp, the flesh change returned with a vengeance. We're talking about Marines mutating faster than ever. Watching the situation, the Legion's chief decided to cast a grand spell to permanently cure the mutation. The spell was way too powerful. It stopped the mutation, but also became the end of the Thousand Sons. Their bodies were instantly vaporized, and their souls were fused with their power armors. This created the Rubicon Marines you fight in Space Marine 2. They are soulless automatons filled with sentient dust, forever trapped in a living tomb. You can also see this detail in Space Marine 2. When you perform an execution on a Rubicon Marine and their head and chest plate pop off, you notice nothing comes out but blue smoke and dust. In reality, they are not screaming because they're hurt. You are literally breaking the seal of their tomb, allowing their soul to finally dissipate into the warp. To them, you aren't just a killer. You are an accidental exorcist. In Warhammer 40k, Space Marines 2, the tank markings are more than just some cool decals. They are a high-fidelity recreation of 30 plus years of Warhammer lore. Since the game features the Ultramarines 2nd Company and Cadian 8th Regiment, the markings follow specific military protocols. As you dive into the game, you will notice gold or yellow trims or circles on the vehicles. This marks them as belonging to the 2nd Company. If they were of the 1st Company, the markings would be silver or white. The white U, which means the Ultima, is always on the primary plates. On tanks like Repulsor or Land Raider, this is typical on the front glacis or the side doors. Players will also see large numbers in large Roman or Gothic numerals, such as II or IV. These are not random numbers. They designate a specific vehicle number in the company's motor pool. On heavy tanks like the Land Raider, you may see a skull and cross symbol. This signifies that the vehicle is a line breaker, or has the honor of carrying Terminators into the battlefield to lay waste to their enemies. One hidden detail is that you may have seen red wax seals with parchments. These are called the Purity Seals. In the game, they are placed in areas that are repaired or blessed by tech marines to ward off machine spirits from malfunctioning. Now, the game has different types of military tanks, each representing something. The Lehman Russ tanks in the game belong to the Cadian 8th Regiment. Their markings are inspired by the World War I and World War II British tanks heraldry. If you're a player who likes to wander off, look for the red-white-red stripes on the sight sponsors or the front. These are Identification Friend or Foe, or IFF for short. They are stripes used to help infantry identify their own tanks through the fog of war. Marines often see numbers like 422. Well, that isn't just another random number. This, my fellow Marines, is a standard military code. So in 422, the first number 4 stands for 4th Company, the second number 2 stands for 2nd Platoon, and the third number, 2, stands for 2nd Vehicle in that platoon. Some of the tanks feature small white rings or kill tally marks on their main cannon barrel. Each ring represents a confirmed high-value kill. Warhammer has been giving the players a treat full of small details. If you look closely at the heretic vehicles or the remains of the corrupted armor, you will find different symbols like the Ouroboros and the All-Seeing Eye. I know the rookies won't understand such terms, but worry not, my fellow Marines, we've got you covered. The Ouroboros is a snake eating its own tail. This represents the cyclic nature of Tzeentch's sorcery, and is the primary mark of the Thousand Suns. The All-Seeing Eye is an icon of a single eye. Unlike Imperial markings, these are often glowing or embossed rather than painted, which I think looks very cool actually. Another cool thing about this game is that the developers added low Gothic scripts to the screens and centers of the tanks. If you zoom in on the tank's viewport, you might see 011001, these binary codes, or a prayer to the Omnissiah, who is the machine god. This represents the Adeptus Mechanicus influence, where every tank is considered a living entity that must be prayed to before it will fire. I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say Space Marine 2 is the most authentic Warhammer 40k game ever. It ran superbly on my PC as well, with nary a framerate dip on ultra settings. The feeling of being a single cog in the machine also ties in with Space Marine 2's PvE operations mode. Throughout the campaign, Titus will issue orders to a secondary squad of Ultramarines, with their missions happening concurrently within Titus's. Operations mode currently consists of 6 of these missions, with more set to arrive in future updates, and this interconnected setup helps to make each one feel narratively important. The first sortie you embark on, for instance, takes place early in the main campaign, when Titus needs the other squad to block the Tyranid advance long enough for him to complete his own objective. Your customizable Astartes sets down a few miles north with the aim of detonating a Promethium refinery and incinerating a massive horde of Xenos, buying Titus enough time to get in and out before completely being overwhelmed. The objective in these missions don't change from one replay to the next, but much like World War Z, the AI director will change up the enemies and their numbers in response to your class and your playstyle. There are 6 unique classes in total, ranging from the sniper to the jump-back equipped assault class. Each one has access to a specific assortment of weapons, perks, and abilities. I'm mostly stuck with the Vanguard, which uses a grapnel launcher to latch onto enemies and propel you toward them. Other classes have the ability that can aid your teammates in battle, such as the sword and shield wielding Bulwark, which can stick a chapter banner in the floor to restore armor to any squad members nearby. You can play both the campaign and operations mode with up to 2 other players, but the variety of classes ensure that operations is a much more engaging co-op experience. When either mode is played solo, the bots you're saddled with aren't too shabby. They can hold their own and rack up kills, and they'll deploy their class abilities when they can. Space Marine 2 is obviously a better game with friends, but it's not a steadfast requirement. One of the other benefits of playing with friends is the unique fashion on display. Each class is cosmetically customizable, with myriad armor pieces and paint jobs to unlock and equip. Some of these are unlocked by achieving a new rank, while others can be purchased with coins you earn from completing missions. It's cool that you can turn your Space Marine into an Omega Marine, Black Templar, or your own colorful abomination. But the rate at which you earn some of the customization options is very painfully slow, actually. The main issue is that the coins you use to purchase emblems and paint jobs are also required to unlock the class and weapon perks, forcing you to weigh up whether you want that Imperial Fist emblem more than the firepower and accuracy upgrade for your Bolt Carbine. It feels like the method for unlocking both should be separate, but that's just me. Fortunately, these cosmetics do at least carry over to Space Marine 2's third and final mode, Eternal War. This competitive PvP mode is refreshing in its simplicity, pitting 6 Space Marines against 6 Chaos Marines across 3 game modes and a handful of maps. Annihilation is your typical team deathmatch. Seize Ground is King of the Hill in all but name, and Capture and Control is your standard zone control mode. What it lacks in new ideas, Eternal War makes up for with the way its classes synergize and clash against one another. This begins with how classes are restricted, limiting you to 2 of each class per team. This might sound negatively prohibitive, but it provides balance and prevents 6 heavies from going up against 6 heavies. With a heavy bolter, 3 bars of armor, and a class perk that gives them a temporary shield, the heavy class initially appears to be the top dog. That is, until you start experimenting with the other 5 classes. The Bulwark can use its shield to charge at the heavy and close the distance to where the heavy's lack of melee options hinders it. But then, how do you deal with a Bulwark? The Vanguard and its grapnel launcher are an option, as latching onto an enemy stuns them for a moment, negating the Bulwark shield as you go to work with the combat knife. Alternatively, the jump pack equipped Assault class can more than hold its own, falling out of the sky like a comet before laying waste with a thunder hammer. Getting accustomed to each class's strengths and weaknesses takes time, especially when you also need to adjust to how different Eternal War feels compared to the rest of the game. First off, the time to kill is significantly shorter, disregarding the power fantasy of being a towering super soldier in favor of quicker skirmishes. You really need to take your vulnerability into account, as teams that stick together can easily steamroll those with players who venture off on their own. Secondly, there's much more of a focus on ranged combat. Melee combat and its ability to ignore armor is a high-risk, high-reward alternative. Being able to bypass armor is appealing, but you're probably putting yourself in the very thick of things by getting in range, so you need to weigh up whether busting out the chainsword is worth it. Eternal War isn't without its faults, however. The maps are bland, boxy arenas with little deviation in level design from one to the next. They lack the scale and spectacle of the campaign, opting instead for environments with no discernible features. The inclusion of Chaos Marines is also a misstep at launch due to the absence of cosmetics. It's disappointing to create your own squad of customized Space Marines only to be saddled with the default forces of Chaos for multiple games in a row. Although I also encountered a bug where my cosmetic changes would randomly reset, there are issues on both sides. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 is a more than worthy successor to the 2011 original. Its brutally gory action is as riveting as ever, but it's also more considered and tactile. making for a much more satisfying experience. There's not a lot going on outside of combat, and it's overly linear at times. But these flaws are easy to forget when you're charging headfirst into battle against an enemy numbering in the hundreds, furiously fighting against a stunning backdrop that brings the tabletop game to life in all its grim dark splendor. Space Marine 2 will deeply resonate with Warhammer 40k fans, yet it also has enough about it to thrill those who can tell their Horus heresy from their Macarian crusade. The wait might have been long, but it was well worth it. We all know that fast-paced, action-packed games like Space Marine 2 must have a badass combat experience, and trust me folks, when I say that Space Marines 2 does not disappoint. Combat has that heavy, chunky feel you'd hope to expect from a game featuring your favorite tabletop space fascists. From the dinkiest bolt pistol to the mightiest of plasma and melter guns, every firearm at the Ultramarines' disposal is loud, brash, and suitably powerful. Mowing into Tyranids with any one of the firearms is quite pleasing indeed. Melee is perhaps more important, since most Tyranids will do all they can to get up close with their big, stabby appendages. Blades, chainswords, smashing fists, and big screw-you hammers hold up their end of the bargain. At times, the game becomes a full-on hack and slash, and it's pretty good for the most part. When an enemy glows red, it's primed for a finisher. They're all violently glorious. Of particular note is the way you execute a Zoanthrope, grabbing its oversized head and literally yanking the thing's face off. It's like pulling a piece of Cadbury caramel apart. I'm not yet sick of seeing the executions or, indeed, any of the moves on display really. Space Marine 2's animations are among its very best features. It's a wonderful game to see in motion. Another stylish move is to pull a quick handgun shot on a dazed opponent. When a reticle appears on an enemy's head, one button pulls the camera in close for a damaging headshot. Just be warned that it's not always reliable, and unlike executions, it can leave you very prone to attacks. It's not always beneficial, but I keep doing it every time I can because it just looks so cool. Despite the fact that you're mostly fighting huge packs of creatures, a curious emphasis is placed on parrying and dodging. It's the usual case of color coding you see in other action games. Attacks that glow blue can be countered, while red ones can only be evaded. The counterattacks are hilarious. Before a smaller enemy has even begun to leap at you, your beefy marine will hold their hand out casually, ready to catch them and slam it down with authority. There are plenty of other fun parries based on your chosen melee weapon. Literally cutting a Tyranid off mid-air with a chainsword is never a bad time. Which, if you think, is pretty badass, as everything in 40k is really. While the countering is fun when you do it, the use of telegraphed prompts requiring specific responses is often at odds with the manic nature of combat. When limbs are flying and beasts are all over the shop, it's very easy to lose track of things. The audio cue for parrying and dodging sounds the same for either, and as a result, I tend to get hit by anything I can't counter, as attempting to parry becomes habitual. Particularly hectic battles can be exercises in frustration as attacks come at all angles, including off-screen, and plenty of them arrive without any warning whatsoever. You also have projectiles, explosion spores, and larger Tyranid creatures to worry about. There's just so much going on, and you'll find that health can drain from full to empty in the blink of an eye. Seriously, it's so wild just how much damage you can take in a second. There's a rally-style system where dealing melee damage recuperates lost health, but if you're in a position where you need it, you'll almost never be able to keep up with what you're losing. Boss fights are where combat's at its worst. While visual spectacles, they're all pains in the player's bum. Many are long, brutal slugs that throw so many attacks your way as to be utterly overwhelming. They're all doable with a good team, but they can end a run very quickly, which honestly really sucks considering how lengthy the missions are. Generally though, combat is not shabby at all. It's fun, gory, and suitably hefty. Pouring bolter fire into a big pile of Tyranids as they pour over each other is just as entertaining as it was when zombies were doing it, while the close quarter stuff is wonderfully brutal. It's just a shame that not everything Saber's trying to do gels well together. The Space Marines can trace their organs back to the Unification War on Terra in the late 30th millennium, when the Emperor of Mankind first revealed his existence and led regiments of deadly genetically engineered soldiers known as Thunder Warriors in a great campaign to unite all the myriad techno-barbarian tribes and nation-states of Old Earth under his rule. From the outside of his retaking of Terra, the Emperor employed genetically modified warriors within his forces, and in these early enhanced troops lay the origins of what would later become the Space Marine Legions. During the Age of Strife, known as Old Night, on Terra, the cradle of mankind had seen more than its fair share of augments and super soldiers created both from the bioalchemy of genetic engineering and cybernetic augmentation. But it was the Emperor's own Thunder Warriors, named for the early Thunderbolt and Raptor's head heraldry, used by their master in the Imperium's earliest days, that were to prove superior to all of them. These superhuman warriors were a gestalt mix of unprecedented superhuman physical power, gene-programmed resistance to environmental and even psychic attack, a warlike spirit, and the Emperor's own strategic genius. The Thunder Regiments were an army unlike anything that had come before them, and the forces of the powerful tyrants of Old Earth had nothing to match them. This unification of humanity's homeworld marked the beginning of the Imperium of Man and the Emperor's quest to reunite all of humanity under a single interstellar government. This quest was intended to prevent his species' extinction from the growing threats which confronted the human-settled galaxy in the wake of the Age of Strife. But despite their many early victories in the Unification Wars, the Thunder Warriors were far from perfect. Some were mentally unstable, others suffered catastrophic biological failure after an unprecedented span of years, as their own superhuman physiques turned against them in the end. It seems obvious in retrospect that the Emperor knew early on that a more permanent and stable force of genetically enhanced warriors was needed. So even while the Thunder Warriors waged war in their early days, the Emperor gathered about him a team of savants and gene wrights, some willing and others as captives taken from his foes, and constructed new genetics laboratories deep in the vast dungeons of the former Sigillite fortress, which he had taken on his own beneath the Himalayan mountains. Labor there went on for solar decades in absolute secrecy and resulted in the creation of the Primarchs and other wonders of genecraft, known and unknown. Foremost among these were the Space Marines Legion, the Legion Astartes. Into their creation went all the secret history and genetic lore of the Age of Strife, hard wisdom gained through the success and failure of the Thunder Warriors, and the Emperor's own unparalleled genius. Now diving back deeper into the origins, the first among the Space Marines were hand-picked men drawn from the Emperor's personal bodyguard. These volunteers were subject to surgical genetic and psychological modification. With rigorous training and appropriate mental conditioning, they became not only immensely strong and tough, but iron-willed and disciplined, no longer prone to the psychological damage that normally affected humans facing the stress of constant combat. They were an unstoppable force whose loyalty to the Emperor was unflinching. Quickly, the process was refined and systematized, and the number of the new enhanced warriors, at first armed and armored as the Thunder Warriors had been, grew swiftly. The first Astartes were organized into 20 distinct regiments, numbering no more than a few hundred warriors each. Although it remained a dire secret at the time, it is now widely believed that this division was more than a merely administrative one, as each regiment contained a variant gene seed, drawn from a different primogenitor Primarch. This one manifested its influence in subtle and unexpected ways, not least of all in influencing the psychological character of the genetically enhanced warriors. With the regiments expanding rapidly into full legions with the intake of new blood from the areas of Terra that had already joined cause with the Emperor, the new warriors quickly eclipsed and replaced the mighty but far less disciplined and mentally unstable Thunder Warriors. As the Proto-Space Marine Legions were unleashed in the latter days of the Unification Wars, victory followed victory in quick succession. As time went on, The Space Marine regiments became legions as the Emperor recruited young men from amongst the newly conquered tribes of Old Earth, and hundreds of Astartes in service to the Imperium swiftly became tens of thousands. These superhuman troops dominated the final days of the Wars of Unification, easily defeating all their Terran opponents and forcing those among the tech priests of Mars who had intervened in the conflict on Terra to delay the Emperor's victory to sue for peace. But in truth, the victories of the early Space Marines created a new problem within the Imperial fold. The Emperor had been right to be worried about his earlier creations, the Thunder Warriors. One ancient source claims that even before the Unification Wars had ended, the Thunder Warriors, already jealous of their replacements' long lives, at least realized that their creator had cursed them with short lifespans as a result of their imperfect genetic augmentations. In their rage and fear, they turned upon him for what they saw as his betrayal. Despite such tragedies, the Space Marines fought with righteous zeal, and it was they who first referred to the mission as a crusade. By their efforts, for the first time in unrecorded millennia, the Earth was united under the rule of one man. The armor they wore was not new, but the same partially powered armor that had evolved on Old Earth, and was worn by the elite of both the Emperor's armies and the techno-barbarian tribes that had fought against him. Some of this thunder armor, first named for the thunder regiments that were the Legion's forebearers, was newly forged, but the Emperor's warsmiths also took or cannibalized many suits from the armories and corpses of conquered foes. Over time, the Space Marine legions gained their own marks of distinction and character. Names, Emperor given in some cases, others by the Primarchs, came to replace the Legion's original numbers, with many Space Marine companies seeking to single themselves out from their brother legions. Battle honors were accumulated, and the effect of each legion's character worked upon them, so that as the legions expanded to conquer the galaxy, Storm could Grey become Granite, Silver, Viridian, Sable, Gold, Ocean, Ash, or Rice, and by the time of the triumph of Ulanor, the Grey Legions of the Unification era were gone, lost to history. In Space Marines 2, the demonic presence is tied to Tzeentch, the chaos god of change, sorcery, and architecture. Unlike the Tyranids, who are biological, the demons in this game are entities of the warp, which means they follow different physical laws and tactical patterns. Through the campaign, you find many of these entities. While they are not your average enemies, you may want to hit them with the heavy attacks, because, greater the attack, the greater the damage. Yeah. Now, the final boss encounter in the campaign brings the Mariners to the Lord of Change, a greater demon of Tzeentch. This demon won't be as easy as mowing down regular monsters with your chainsword. Diving deep into the lore of these creatures, we find that they are born from some impossible nightmare. Immense bird-like demons with shimmering skin, wicked curved beaks, and multicolored, spectrum-shattering wings. Those who gaze upon these twisted prisms of pure magic begin to feel their sanity shred and reasoning slip away. Faced by a being of change incarnate, bedrock beliefs crumble and twists, and the mind seeks firm purchase in vain. Treachery, deceit, capriciousness, these are the hallmarks of the Lords of Change. Tzeentch's greatest servants weave scheme upon scheme, a dense tangle of intermingling threads so convoluted and aeon-spanning that none can grasp their true purpose. These greater demons appear as towering beings with gangling limbs and are deceptively delicate-looking. Their long, spindly bodies are topped by a savage, cruel avian head resting on a long, crooked neck. Their hunched shoulders are often draped with what looks like the robes of a high priest or a court wizard from ages long past. Their bent, bird-like legs are scaly and end in vicious talons. Their lank arms terminate in broad, clawed hands. Great feathered wings sprout from their shoulder blades, glittering and glinting with 1,000 impossible colors. I sometimes think that they look like something magical, like an Egyptian god, much like Anubis and others. The bones of a Lord of Change are hollow, and despite their enormous size, They barely seem capable of supporting their own weight, often leaning on immense staffs etched with innumerable eldritch signs and sigils. Most Lords of Change carry long ceremonial staves, which they use to channel their considerable psychic power. These powerful demon servants of Tzeentch carry themselves with a regal grace, though when driven to action, their savagery is remarkable. Their appearance, however, is yet another trick. Lords of Change are fearsome fighters, servant quick with skin like iron. They are also lore masters and possess a thorough knowledge of the great feints and fighting techniques of the galaxy. To fence with a Lord of Change is to invite one's own ruin. Many of the zealous warriors have been felled by their vicious claws, cruel curved beaks, and terrible reaping staves, disemboweled before they could even lift their blades. Nothing that is done can be undone. Nothing that is made can be unmade. To prevail against a Lord of Change, one's faith and convictions must be firmer than the foundation of the stars. The Emperor protects, but one's faith must be ironclad in the face of such honor. The constant appraisal of the galaxy and the interference in its progress is not always so subtle. Change can also be sudden and violent, and a Lord of Change will readily wage war to further their unknowable aims. Their most potent weapons are the magic that flows in their immortal veins and their masterful manipulation of mortals. Though these greater demons prefer to remain uncommitted in battle, it is not through lack of courage or ferocity, but because they wish to direct their forces and control the tide and flowing of the fighting. However, the Lords of Change are masters of magic, amongst the most powerful sorcerers in the galaxy. With a flick of a finger, a Lord of Change can engulf a score of enemy warriors in flickering warp flames, inflicting a fate that is as unpredictable as it is deadly. With a single word, it can transform a mighty hero into a gibbering pile of mutated spawn flesh. Besides, the bullets are rendered worthless against such power. The Space Marines, too, is a tiny, whiny part of Warhammer's universe. Now Marines, we've all been known to the word Primarch. The question comes to mind, what the hell is a Primarch? While the game itself doesn't give us much info on Primarchs, worry not, my fellow Marine brothers, because we've got you covered, as we've been doing some serious research on the lore of the Warhammer universe. Primarchs are not your regular Marine warriors. They are more like the Primes of the Warhammer universe. The Primarchs were the 20 genetically engineered transhuman sons of the Emperor of Mankind, created in the late 30th millennium. They were intended to be the immortal and superhuman generals and proconsuls who would command the Emperor's great crusade to reunite the scattered human race beneath his leadership. Their genomes later survived as the genetic template from which the Emperor crafted his 20 Space Marines Legion. The Primarchs were bred to be perfect generals, warriors, and statesmen. Larger, stronger, faster, and smarter than any normal human could ever hope to be. They possessed a potent charisma and powers that made them like the mythical gods of old, untouchable by disease, old age, or the petty failings of lesser men. They were flawless, like some divine creatures of heaven. Each embodied an aspect of war. One was the greatest strategist ever known, another the personification of the terror of war, a third the master of psychic powers, a fourth the greatest practitioner of the art of fortification, and so on. The Primarchs were the Emperor's answer to reclaiming all the lost worlds of mankind and welcoming them into his new Imperium. The Emperor intended to raise his sons to be the best military commanders and political leaders in human history. They would bring the imperial truth to the rest of the human settled galaxy in their father's name, serving as his generals and proconsuls. But the Chaos Gods intervened to foil their great adversaries' plans, and the Primarchs were spirited away through the warp to other human-settled planets of the galaxy. Deprived of the Emperor's care and guidance, each developed a personality uniquely shaped and sometimes damaged by the difficult circumstances of their homeworlds. Previously, we've mentioned some Primarchs like Magnus the Red or Sanguinius and Horus. Yet, for all their gifts, the Primarchs were still only men, and in the end, their all-too-human flaws would become the primary obstacle to the realization of the Emperor's great dream for mankind. When first touched by the hand of chaos, the first seeds of corruption were laid in the breasts of those Primarchs who would eventually turn traitor to the Emperor and his Imperium. Whether the Emperor was able to affect this outcome is unsure, but every Primarch landed on ancient worlds of humanity, planets long since lost to the light of the greater universe beyond the stars. This was a massive setback to the Emperor's plans. He had continued on his superhuman generals to lead his army of conquest out from Terra. Without them, his plans, so many millennia in the making, rested on a knife's edge. He needed an edge, something to give mankind an advantage as they struck out against the very hostile galaxy once more. Despite this terrible setback, the Emperor was nothing if not adaptive, and he decided to move forward without the Primarchs. He and the scientists of the Imperial Biotechnical Division had already used the samples of genetic material from each of his Primarchs to craft the first Astartes gene seed solar decades before. Stem-celled zygotes from which had been cultured genetically engineered organs that, when implanted within a normal adolescent human male host, would allow the man to take on many of the physical and mental properties possessed by each Primarch. The Emperor had implanted these organs into the bravest, strongest, and best young human warriors identified amongst his armies, whom he intended to stand by his side as the vanguard of the Great Crusade. Thus were born the legions Astartes and the Space Marines, and they would reconquer the galaxy for humanity at the command of the Master of Mankind, even without the initial leadership of their Primarchs. Did you know that in Space Marines 2, the chaplain of the Second Company is revealed in the final cutscene to be Leandros, the former squadmate of Titus from the original Space Marine game? At the end of the game, after the successful conclusion of the Deciduous campaign, the chaplain removes his skull helm to reveal his face to Titus, confirming he has survived the century since the first game. Throughout the game, he is referred to as Chaplain Quintus, a name he likely took upon entering the chaplaincy, which follows the tradition of assuming a faceless persona of authority, more like a secret ghost identity. Why is it so important? Well, Leandros is the one responsible for reporting Titus to the Inquisition at the end of the first game. Because of Titus's unexplained resistance to the warp, he was the first to meet Titus after his transformation into a Primaris Space Marine. While he facilitated Titus's return to the Ultramarines, he did so with extreme suspicion, ordering Titus to keep his past a secret, warning that he would execute him if he ever faltered. While Chapter Master Marneus Calgar was reportedly infuriated by Titus's treatment, he ultimately allowed Leandros to become chaplain because his harsh gaze and rigid dogmatism made him a perfect candidate for enforcing chapter discipline. In the Warhammer 40k lore, Leandros is a member of the Ultramarines chapter recognized primarily for his extreme adherence to the Codex Astartes and his controversial betrayal of his commanding officer, Demetrian Titus. Now sit back and relax while we discuss the history of this crazy written character. During the liberation of Graia, Leandros was a young, inexperienced battle brother in the Ultramarine 2nd Company command squad under Captain Titus. Before serving under Titus, Leandros was captured by the Eldari on his very first mission. His previous captain Lucian Trajan was killed while attempting to rescue him, a tragedy that fueled Leandros' later obsession with absolute rule, following as a means of personal redemption. Obsessed with the letter of the law, Leandros grew suspicious of Titus's natural resistance to warp energy. Despite Titus saving the world, Leandros reported him to the Inquisition. This act actually violated the codex he claimed to revere, which dictates reporting suspected heresy to the chapter's own chaplains or librarians first. Over the century between games, Leandros' rigid dogmatism and unwavering focus on spiritual purity made him a natural candidate for reclusium. Some lore theories suggest his assignment to this role was a way to redirect his narrow-minded zeal into a productive regulated channel. In Space Marines 2, Leandro assumes the identity of Chaplain Quintus. He hides his face in a skull helm and serves as the moral guardian of the Second Company, eventually being the one to oversee Titus's reinduction after his service in the Deathwatch. Leandros is widely considered one of the most hated characters in the Warhammer fandom. His by-the-book arrogance and the fact that his actions led to Titus being tortured by Inquisition for decades have made him a target of community memes and general revulsion. So folks, by Leandros' tale, we learn that don't be arrogant or a pain in the bottom. Folks, one of my personal favorite things about the Warhammer Space Marine 2 is the vast fun of customization. The game's customization is a deep system focused on letting you recreate iconic chapters or design your own successor, Legion. Customization is managed at the Armoring Hall on the Battle Barge. This game has an achievement system, which means players should achieve certain tasks to get certain customizations unlocked. For starters, the unlock trigger becomes available after completing the tutorial and reaching the mission Inferno in the main story. Now, my personal favorite, and I think any of the Marina's favorite part of this, is the armor customization. Players can literally swap out helms, pauldrons, breastplates, gauntlets, greaves, and war gear, like cloaks or iron halos. It gives a complex experience to build your own death machine to slash the enemies. It does not just end there. You can also access over 30 legendary chapters like the Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, etc. to use their specific emblems and color schemes. You can create custom chapter patterns by setting a general color rule or adding specific rules for individual parts, like a different color for just one knee or gauntlet. Players also have the option to toggle helmets off in the menu. Talk about free will, folks. Customization is tied to the game's 6 classes: Tactical, Assault, Vanguard, Bulwark, Sniper, and Heavy. Each class has its own progression track where winning matches or completing missions unlocks new armor pieces specifically for that class. Customization is so vast I can talk you all to sleep just discussing it. I know that's the point, but just in case you're not asleep yet, let's keep going. So yeah, Chaos customization is more restricted. Each class is locked to a specific traitor legion, though you can still change their color and emblem. Weapon customization includes both functional upgrades and cosmetic skins. Unlocking more powerful mastery tiers of a weapon also unlocks unique cosmetic skins for it. Once a skin is equipped to a weapon, it typically carries across all loadouts for that specific class. Now, the armor sets are unlocked primarily by winning matches in PvP or completing operations in PvE. The requisition points are the game's currency. This in-game currency earned by playing is used to purchase new colors, emblems, and character-specific cosmetic packs from the heraldry menu. Talking about the DLC and season passes in the games, new chapter packs like the Space Wolves and Dark Angels are seasonally providing exclusive armor parts, weapon skins, and decals. Did you all know that in the Warhammer universe, Mars isn't just your average planet? For us, Mars is just one of the solar system's planets of barren, wasted land, but it has a completely different story in the Warhammer universe. Mars, also known as the Red Planet, is the first and greatest Forge world. It is located in the Sol system of the Segmentum Solar and produces vast numbers of weapons, vehicles, and other advanced technology for the Imperium and its war efforts throughout the galaxy. Mars is also the homeworld and headquarters of the Adeptus Mechanicus and a planet sacred to the faith of the cult Mechanicus, which is one of the reasons why travel to the Red Planet for Imperial personnel who are not members of the Mechanicus and share its peculiar faith is restricted. The Red Planet is the birthplace of the cult Mechanicus and is considered the holiest of all celestial orbs in the galaxy to the adherents of that faith. So vaunted is Mars that across the stars, 100 worlds have been terraformed and settled in exactly the same manner. Millennia of incessant construction have turned Mars into a smog-choked hellscape. The surface is covered with massive forge complexes, sprawling refineries, towering monuments to the glory of the machine and weapon shops that scrape the skies. The massive orbital conglomeration of thousands of dry docks and other starship manufacturing facilities in a geosynchronous orbit that turns above the Martian equator is known collectively as the Ring of Iron. It was the shipyard of the Ring of Iron that constructed the vast exploratory and expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade in the late 30th millennium, and even today produced the majority of the Imperial Navy's capital ships. Spacecraft are constructed within the Ring's extensive orbital factories, and many of the ships of the Battle Fleet Solar are based in its huge floating docks. The moon Deimos is absent from Mars's orbit, seconded to the Grey Knights of Titan in aeons long past. It is possible that Mars is also the world where the ancient and terrible Catan, known as the Void Dragon, has chosen to slumber for aeons. The ancient Mechanicum government of Mars recognized the Emperor as the Omnissiah, machine god incarnate, and swore to lend their technology, the mighty war machines, of their Titan legions and all of their production facilities to the purpose of his great crusade to reunite all the scattered worlds of mankind beneath the rule of the Imperium. In return, the Emperor promised the Mechanicum that it could maintain its political autonomy on Mars and all of its other forge worlds across the galaxy, and that it would remain immune from adherence to the atheistic doctrine of the Imperial Truth. This ensured that the adepts of the Mechanicum could still maintain their faith in the machine god. Therefore, Mars is just as important to the Imperium's survival as Terra itself, a reality reflected in the emblem of the two-headed Imperial Aquilla, one head for Terra and the other for the Red Planet. Mars is strictly stratified in its social order. The Red Planet is ruled over by the Adeptus Mechanicus' Fabricator General, and the Mechanicus possesses almost every known piece of standard template construct, or STC technology, or designs currently in Imperial hands. This is ostensibly so that the Mechanicus can construct better and more durable vehicles and technology for the Imperium, although it is fairly clear that the Mechanicus is simply hoarding them. The lowest social level consists of the Martian citizens, mainly unaugmented human populations who labor en masse at simple tasks, such as sorting isotope scrap, tending hydroponics, breaking ore, stoking forges, and so on. Most citizens aspire to gain status within Mars's theocratic society by joining the Skitarii Legion. In the process, they will receive their first battle-grade bionics and perhaps a way of later entering the full priesthood of the machine god. Lesser citizens may sport tattoos and piercings, suggestive of such bionics, but dress in common work clothes, filthy overalls, rad tabards, or cabled Environ suits. Regardless of station, Martians have the tendency to be burly, saturnine, and shaven head, usually with a temper to match their dura aspect, and every detail has its own story, people. All sport electus, subcutaneous cyberware that ranges from code patches through which personal data is monitored to thick veins of electric cabling. Through these electu circuits can the glory of the Omnissiah be channeled. In times of great strife, the masters of Mars's populace can use these interfaces to turn even the most gourmandish hab worker into a dauntless warrior of the machine god. Now, you won't find this information about Mars in your school astronomy books now, would you? Earlier, we did mention the Deathwatch. It's not actually some badass name. In the Warhammer universe, the Deathwatch plays a critical role. Let's dive into the lore of the Deathwatch, shall we? The Deathwatch, also known as the Long Vigil and the Long Watch, is a unique chapter of the Adeptus Astartes comprised solely of veteran Space Marines that serves the Ordo Xenos of the Imperial Inquisition as its chamber militant. They are the warriors of last resort when the Inquisition needs access to firepower greater than which the Astra Militarum or a team of its own acolytes or throne agents can provide. It is the sacred task of the Deathwatch to stand sentry against all of these terrible Xenos races and many more besides. They are ready to act when such ancient evils rise to threaten mankind once more. The Space Marines of the Deathwatch form the first and often only line of defense against these inhuman horrors. Unlike other Space Marines, the ones serving in the Deathwatch are not truly a separate chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. Rather, they are a collection of veteran Space Marines drawn from all of the different extant chapters who served together in the Inquisition's service for a discrete period of time. To be chosen by one's chapter to serve in the Long Vigil of the Deathwatch is a great honor for any Space Marine. Only the most elite and experienced members of a chapter are ever chosen for this extremely hazardous tour of duty, the specifics of which must be kept secret by inquisitorial order and sacred oath even from a Deathwatch Astartes home chapter. Deathwatch Space Marines do not usually form the standard tactical groups like squads and companies generally used by the Adeptus Astartes. Instead, they operate as small special forces units in close-knit groups of specialists called kill teams. If a Xenos threat is particularly dangerous, several kill teams may be assigned to deal with it. But if the threat is still too much for even the Deathwatch to handle, the Inquisition will be forced to turn to a full Space Marine chapter or to multiple regiments of the Imperial Guard to deal with it. The finest war gear the Imperium can provide lines the reliquaries of each watch fortress. Though many of these artifacts are the work of the Adeptus Mechanicus, not even the tech priests of the machine cult knows their true number. The act of technological innovation is a testament to tech heresy in the rest of the Imperium, but it is not forbidden within the Deathwatch chapter. With every new war, the chapter reassesses and fine-tunes its mission tactics, and its equipment is subjected to the same rigorous scrutiny. The weapons these black-armored warriors bear to war are painstakingly engineered, customized, and auto-sanctified to be the bane of specific alien foes. Not a single boat's potential is wasted, be it filled with bioacid, volatile promethium, or superheated plasma. It will be selected and aimed to do the maximum possible damage to its target upon detonation. Even heavy weaponry and the guns of Strikecraft can be set to fire different ammunition types or discharge variable energies depending on their target. This is a necessary measure, for kill teams rarely know the exact composition of the Xenos enemies they will be facing, and consider versatility of the weapon unto itself. With a small arsenal of military assets at his command, a member of the Deathwatch can theoretically wrest victory from any breed of foe. The suits of power armor found amongst the Deathwatch are amongst the finest of their kind. Many are so ancient and well respected that they bear names of antiquity such as Iron Sanctum or Pride of Lord Varico. Just as with guns, blades, and other weapons, it is up to the initiate whether he continues to use that battle plate he is familiar with from his parent chapter, or whether he replaces it with a suit tended to by the Deathwatch's own tech marine. There is no uniformity enforced upon this order save the chapter colors. The only real dogma is that the battle brother maximizes his own effectiveness in the field. It is not uncommon to find a kill team where every member bears a different suit of weapons to war, even to the extent that some use jump packs or ride rugged assault bikes into the fray, whilst their brethren go on foot. Though many of the chapter's tools of battle resemble advanced versions of those used by their fellow Adeptus Astartes, there are far stranger and more exotic relics of battle available to them. The war vaults of the Deathwatch contain everything from oversized thunder hammers designed to slay alien giants and make you feel like Thor, to stasis bombs that use time itself as a weapon. Some even contain doomsday warheads of mass destruction that can set an entire world aflame. Many are weapons of last resort, but the Deathwatch does not hesitate in their use. You might have seen war machines like Jaegers from Pacific Rim in the game. Well, they are not machines. They are called Dreadnoughts. The actual story about them is very horrifying. A Dreadnought is not a robot. It is a cybernetic combat walker containing the mangled remains of a legendary hero. The pilot is permanently entombed in a life support sarcophagus filled with amniotic fluid. Even the superhuman space marines are still mortal and can fall in battle despite legends to the contrary amongst the common people of the Imperium of Man. Dreadnoughts are war incarnate, towering machines that advanced forward with thunderous strides, fiery death roaring from the myriad of heavy weapons mounted on their hulls. They are terrifying foes, fighting with all the skill and ferocity of a space marine, but combined with the durability and firepower of a battle tank. When the greatest of the Astartes are crippled in combat, the Battle Brother's body will be repaired and transferred into an armored cyber-organic sarcophagus outfitted with extensive life support systems. This sarcophagus is then interred within the heart of the armored torso of a dreadnought if there is even a spark of life left. The pilot himself survives only as a tightly curled and shriveled organic component deep inside the dreadnought, which is at once his reborn body and his tomb. Sustained and kept alive within the sarcophagus, the link between his physical being and the dreadnought's systems is absolute and for the remainder of his life. The space marine within the sarcophagus will control the robotic body of the walker and experience the outside world through a web of cyborg neural links and sensors implanted within his life support systems. The sepulchre that contains a chapter's dreadnoughts is a holy shrine, and the tech marines tend to their charges with great care, fastidiously applying sacred oils and unguents while chanting the litanies of preservation. To honor these courageous warriors, the fallen heroes are allowed to sleep away the Terran centuries until need calls them to war once more. The oldest dreadnought in the Imperium, Bjorn, the fell-handed of the Space Wolves, was a member of the Primarch Leandros' retinue and fought in the Horus Heresy when he was still whole of body, making him well over 10,000 standard Terran years old. When the dreadnoughts are not in use by their chapter, they are placed back into the chapter's chapel in its fortress monastery to sleep away the centuries in a form of suspended animation until they are needed once more. As they sleep, the sepulchres in the armory that houses dreadnoughts are regarded as sacred shrines by the dreadnought's battle brothers, and tech marines delicately anoint them with sacred balms and oils on a daily basis. Dreadnoughts are highly revered by their brothers for their wisdom and strength, and some space marines attend them to pay respects even whilst they're asleep. Folks, when it comes to close combat fighting, the dreadnoughts show no mercy. They are big bad killing machines who only kill and serve till their last existing moment. Now, the dreadnoughts come with a variety of lethal weapons that treat their enemies like a Friday barbecue. These massive weapons are specialized in destroying enemies at close quarters and take the form of massive fists, claws, hammers, shields, drills, or blades. The weapons attach to the end of the dreadnought's weapon arms, or in some cases take up the entirety of the arm itself. The vast majority of dreadnought close combat weapons feature built-in ranged weapons, such as stormbolters or heavy flamers. These weapons, depending on the dreadnought's close combat weapon size and shape, as well as the dreadnought's chassis pattern, may be built into the weapon arm, attached to the outside of the weapon arm, or fixed onto the dreadnought's hull. The term dreadnought close combat weapon is also sometimes applied to non-humans constructed vehicles that fit into the Dreadnought class of combat walkers but are shorter than an Imperial Knight, such as Chaos Demon Engine Eldari Wraith Lords and Orc Killer Khans. The term is also used to encompass the myriad battle automata that are robots of the Adeptus Mechanicus' Legion, Cybernetica, and other Imperial combat walkers armed with massive close combat weapons. Some of you might have watched the movie Ender's Game. The main antagonists shown in the movie are outer world species that come in fleets and armadas. Picture the same thing, only a lot worse and deadlier. That is what the Tyranid Hive Fleet are in the Warhammer 40k universe. Well, the Hive Fleet are all connected in a hive mind. A Hive Fleet is a large armada of living, biomechanical starships created by the Tyranids for the purpose of gathering the raw materials and biomass necessary for the reproduction, evolution, and expansion of their species. A Hive Fleet is used to attack and strip star systems of their biomass using the full range of Tyranid bioforms. Only 3 primary Tyranid Hive fleets and a host of smaller so-called splinter fleets have ever come into direct contact with the Imperium of Man, but they have all brought devastating damage and loss of life. As we mentioned, these bloodthirsty monsters are connected in a hive mind. The hive mind holds all Tyranids in a powerful psychic bond that enables them to act together in perfect unison. Under the influence of this ancient disembodied consciousness, the Tyranids have fed on countless planets and devoured civilizations since time immemorial across many galaxies. The coming of a Tyranid Hive Fleet is preceded by a smothering psychic signal that envelops entire star systems and disrupts all forms of warp travel and communication. Swallowed up by psychic static, whole worlds suddenly go deathly silent, giving no clues as to what is unfolding on the surface below, or of what terrors are about to befall them. This is the Shadow in the Warp, and it heralds imminent invasion and horror. It is unknown if the Shadow in the Warp is created deliberately by the Hive Fleet, or if it is simply a byproduct of the Hive Mind's innate synaptic control over their myriad bioforms. In any case, the Shadow in the Warp creates fear and panic wherever it falls, instilling a pervasive dread into the minds of a prey world's defenders, plunging entire planets into misery and despair. For highly psychic species such as the Craftworld Eldari, or for luckless psychers caught within this enervating effect, the malaise is magnified tenfold. For intelligent species such as the humans of the Imperium of Man, whose means of interstellar communication and travel rely upon highly specialized psychers such as astropaths and navigators, the Shadow in the Warp is one of the deadliest facets of the Tyranid menace. Bereft of their means to call for reinforcements or safely navigate the surrounding space, the worlds of the Imperium are easily isolated from the wider galaxy. In Space Marines 2, the fleet we encounter is the Hive Fleet Leviathan, which is one of the primary fleets, and by primary, you can guess it was also one of the worst for the humans. Hive Fleet Leviathan was the third and largest Tyranid incursion into the Milky Way galaxy and marked the start of the Third Tyranid War for the survival of the Imperium. Less than 5 years standard after the defeat of Hive Fleet Kraken in the Second Tyranid War, Lord Fetus Cryptman noted the telltale signs of yet another Tyranid invasion. He implemented the Cryptman census, burning out dozens of astropaths in an attempt to contact scores of worlds on every fringe of the Imperium. Slowly, the responses and lack of them formed a pattern, and the venerable Inquisitor was able to chart the course of the Tyranid's latest Hive Fleet to arrive in the galaxy. Codenamed Leviathan, this time the Tyranids approached from below the galactic plane, attacking from 2 points spaced wide apart in the shape of a closing pair of jaws, cutting off large portions of the galaxy from warp travel or astropathic communication. At a great cost in human life, a combined force of Planetary Defense Forces troops, 2 regiments of the Astra Militarum, the Ultramarines of the Adeptus Astartes, and a Deathwatch kill team under the command of Inquisitor Cryptman crushed the left half of the Leviathan on the world of Tarsis Ultra, destroying the Tyranids nearest to Terra and re-establishing astropathic contact with the Imperial worlds between Leviathan's jaws. The Imperium had won its first victory in a war that had only begun. Later during the era Indomitus, the Blood Angels and their successors among the Sanguinary Brotherhood defeated a massive tendril of the Leviathan with the aid of the demons of Khorne's blood legions, commanded by the Indomitus Crusade of Rebute Guilliman at the Battle of Baal. Unfortunately, the hive mind had only begun to intensify its final push against the Imperium. It was not long after the fighting on Baal that the largest mass of Hive Fleet Leviathan yet encountered attacked the western reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus, seeking to strike at a relatively undefended region of the galaxy, while the defenders of the Imperium were otherwise engaged with the forces of chaos emanating out of the Great Rift. The Great Tyranid Assault, the start of the Fourth Tyrannic War, began with a coordinated attack from above and below the galactic plane by three new tendrils of the Leviathan dubbed Hive Fleet Nautilon, Hive Fleet Promethor, and Hive Fleet Grendilus, respectively, by the Imperium. The two tendrils were moving in parallel towards their ultimate goal of terror in the Segmentum Solar, and with the Imperium distracted by the ongoing demands of the Indomitus Crusade, few human forces initially were available to stand against it. The Aquilla is one of the most common symbols in all of Warhammer 40k, and it certainly makes plenty of appearances in Space Marine 2 as well. The twin-headed eagle is the simplest of the Imperium of Man. The sacred symbol can be found all over the place, with the more detailed versions found on the battle barge. On that version, you can see that the left eagle has eyes, while the right one is blindfolded. The blindfolded side represents mankind looking to its past mistakes, while the one with sight looks towards a better future. The sign can also be made using your hands, a gesture that members of the Astra Militarum can be seen doing occasionally. The sign of the Aquilla is a universal hand gesture used to show one's allegiance to the Imperium, and is known to every citizen within its boundaries. It is used as a respectful neutral greeting or farewell gesture, mainly when one is unsure of the recipient's rank and/or the proper etiquette in the given situation. There is some debate as to how the gesture is made. The sign of the Aquilla has its user place their hands flat on their chest with their thumbs interlocked. This forms the image of the Imperial Eagle on the chest, with the thumbs forming the head and the straight fingers symbolizing its wings. The Aquilla gesture is often accompanied by a nod or slight bow. On the worlds of the Ultima Segmentum, thumbing the palm is a common gesture. It is performed by placing the thumb in the middle of the palm in order to form a stylized Aquilla wing. It is often done to ward off misfortune or bring good luck. The Aquilla is also displayed on Space Marine power armor since the end of the Horus Heresy, when that honor was given to all loyalist Space Marines by the Emperor, rather than just the traitor Marines of the Emperor's Children Legion. It is also stamped on weapons produced for the Imperium at its Adeptus Mechanicus Forge worlds. Boaters, lasguns, tanks, and every other piece of Imperial military equipment often displays the Aquilla painted or stamped on them. And last but not least, the Aquilla is also stamped on signet rings belonging to those serving in an Imperial public office, in the Imperial military, or in another adeptor of the Adeptus Terra like the Adeptus Administratum. In Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, players see many of the warships used by the Marines during their campaign, but one specific ship has some serious historical significance and some badass lore. It's not some handheld weapon, but it is a legendary Thunderhawk gunship known as the Lance of Jove, belonging to the Ultramarines' Second Company. The Lance of Jove first appeared in the original 2011 game, where it was the primary transport for then Captain Titus during the Graia campaign. The ship is praised by players all over the globe because centuries later in Space Marines 2, the gunship is still in service. It serves as the primary tactical transport for Lieutenant Titus and Squad Damocles during the defense of the Aristides system. After their previous transport, the Absolver was destroyed. Well, the gunship in Space Marines 2 features the same name and specific quote from Primarch Rebute Gilliman on its hull, which says, "To a Space Marine, the bolt gun is far more than a weapon. It is an instrument of mankind's divinity. In the campaign, the Lance of Jove acts as the narrative bridge between missions frequently seen during extraction sequences and atmospheric insertions. One interesting moment in the campaign is when during the mission on Avarax, the gunship is involved in a major sequence where it sustains minor damage while extracting the squad, requiring an emergency landing that shifts the mission's focus. While you cannot fly, you can view the Lance of Jove in the battle barge between missions. As a standard Thunderhawk gunship, the Lance of Jove is equipped with some seriously damaging weaponry. It has a dorsal-mounted turbo laser or battle cannon, along with multiple twin-linked heavy bolters for anti-infantry defense with capacity to carry up to 30 Space Marines on several Rhino chassis vehicles via magnetic hooks. I don't know about y'all, but every time I feel like I'm in an Edge of Tomorrow type of scenario. Have you ever had the thought, who is the main evil behind all this chaos while playing Space Marines 2? Well, the answer is the Tzeentch. Now, this villain is so well written and the info is so vast that it might need some videos of its own. I'll give you some information on it though. Tzeentch's true power is sorcery, and as all sorcery flows from the front of the Immaterium, so too is Tzeentch, the master of that twisted chaotic medium of psychic energy. Tzeentch embodies mortals' tendency towards mutability and change, the drive to evolve and manipulate. This spirit is present in the essence of every living creature, from the first division of cells in the womb to the ultimate craving for survival. It is in the hearts of those with the strongest desire to prevail that Tzeentch whispers his insidious promise, offering a means of life eternal to those unwilling to accept death and oblivion as inevitable. It is also Tzeentch who weaves the threads that connect every action, plot, and subtle intrigue in a galaxy-wide game of manipulation and subterfuge. At the end of each of these threads lies the ensnared soul of a human puppet, those of Tzeentch's mortal servants and agents who believe they serve the Lord of Sorcery in mutually beneficial pacts. The truth is that Tzeentch's every action is planned with its ultimate goal as his own establishment as the preeminent chaos power in the realm of chaos, the ultimate victor in the great game. Of course, the very nature of the Lord of Entropy is such that, were he to attain this triumph, he will still strive for turmoil and change. In many ways, Tzeentch is both the best and least understood of the Dark Gods. He is the god of fate, plots and schemes, as well as the god who exemplifies the ever-changing nature of the warp. However, Tzeentch does not plot towards some end. He schemes simply to scheme. He is constantly building, even as his devices unravel under their own complexity. At the same time, he is the god of knowledge and comprehension, and his devotees may be those who seek a deeper understanding of an often enigmatic universe. In my opinion, Tzeentch is the worst of the worst. Tzeentch is known by 100,000 titles across the galaxy. Amongst them, the Weaver of Destinies, the Great Conspirator, and the Architect of Fate. In his mind, he listens to the hopes and desires for change of every sentient being from every planet in the universe. He watches over the plans of his playthings as they unfold into history, toying with fate and fortune, both for his own entertainment and to further his unfathomable scheme. Those of you who are familiar with the Warhammer 40k universe and lore have probably seen more than they would have liked from Calgar, but also thoroughly enjoyed the cinematic where he comes in to save the day in Space Marine 2. To those unfamiliar, they might not have known what the hype was all about and why Marneus Calgar got so many dramatic slow-motion shots. He was introduced in the game's best cinematic, and then launched a mass counterattack to start the Space Marine 2 final battle. While the game does tell players his station, it doesn't elaborate on how much of a monster Calgar is. Marneus Calgar is the chapter master of the Ultramarines and is the Lord of Macragge, the capital world of Ultramar. On top of this, he underwent additional arcane processes to become a powerful Primaris Space Marine, making him far mightier than the average brother in his chapter's ranks. Unlike many other Space Marines, he was not the son of a noble house. He was a servant of House Calgar and named Tactican, although he was friends with the original Marneus Calgar before both became Ultramarine aspirants. Now together, both of them discovered that their trainer had been corrupting aspirants. And for those of you who are thinking, what the hell is an aspirant? Aspirants are the best recruits amongst humanity selected to become Space Marines, although the recruitment process varies between chapters. Anyways, coming back to the original topic, Tactican and Calgar fought the trainer, only for Marneus to fall in battle. Tactican was saved by the late intervention of an Ultramarine and then took Marneus' name to share his glory with his best friend. There ended up being a lot of glory to share. Calgar is framed as champion of mankind, a brilliant tactician, and a general who leads his troops from the front. He is everything that Ultramarines aspire to be and one of the most powerful warriors in the ranks of the Imperium of Man. Well, because Calgar is one of the named Warhammer 40k characters, he gets a lot of special treatment in comics and general storytelling, to the point that he starts breaking the law because of how overpowered he ends up being written. For context, Calgar should be just a very mighty, experienced and clever Ultramarine, yet he has feats on par with a Primarch. He defeated an avatar of Cain with a single punch, an enemy that fought toe-to-toe with Fulgrim, one of the 20 Primarchs, which should be a feat far beyond Calgar's means. This is not the only time when Calgar showed how awesome he is. The guy beat a demon prince into submission by literally tearing him limb from limb in the official records. Yeah, talk about brutality, folks. And it wasn't just your average demon. He was too powerful to banish and was known to kill Space Marines with a single thought. As you all are well aware, demon princes are basically demigods, and this hothead Calgar even comes back to finish the job later when this demon prince returns. He also killed a swarm load by punching it to death, and this seems to be his signature way of killing his foes. He was the Batman without any rules for his enemies. The crux of Calgar's controversy comes from how overpowered he is, and almost all his greatest feats were accomplished before he underwent additional processes to become a Primaris Space Marine. He seems to be able to solve almost any issue by punching it in its face, giving me the Kratos vibes. And this issue is further compounded by the extra attention that the Ultramarines tend to receive. Still, Calgar is cool enough to have his fans, and he is lovingly referred to as Papa Smurf. Why, you ask? Well, he is in charge of the Blue Ultramarines, and his inclusion during Space Marine 2's ending is well liked all over the globe, so yeah. For this next fact, I like to issue a spoiler warning, so if you haven't played the game, be warned. I'm about to talk about Imurah. Imurah is the main villain of Space Marines 2. He is a Chaos Space Marine sorcerer of the Thousand Suns who led an incursion into the already beleaguered Residius system to take revenge on Marneus Calgar and battled the returned Lieutenant Titus for banishing him into the warp. Imurah was an Astartes better known as a Space Marine who betrayed the Imperium of Man and became a Sorcerer Lord of the Thousand Suns, a Space Marine legion turned to the Chaos God Tzeentch during the Horus Heresy. Through his great psychic prowess, he became an exalted sorcerer of Tzeentch, among the most favored of Tzeentch's mortal servants and a top lieutenant of Magnus the Red himself. Due to his position, Imurah was presumably the lord of his own Silver Tower of Tzeentch, a beautiful yet deadly demon engine formed from the ruins of the great spires and pyramids of Prospero, the original Thousand Suns homeworld. Roughly 2 centuries before the Residius campaign of the Fourth Tyrannic War, Imurah battled Marneus Calgar, the chapter master of the Ultramarines. In the battle, Calgar was able to overcome Imurah and banished him into the warp, where Imurah faced the wrath of Tzeentch for his failure. Over 2 centuries in real space-time, Imurah was tormented by the Changer of Ways, but swore revenge on Calgar and formulated a scheme to both take revenge and pursue the unfathomable knowledge that his legion strived to unlock. His lore connection in the Warhammer Space Marines 2 is massive. Let's dive into it, my fellow Marines. Sometimes, following the retrieval of a mysterious warp-based power source from Graia, which had previously been sought by 2 Chaos Marine sorcerers and broken down to a single fragment, the Adeptus Mechanicus began working on Project Aurora, a continuation on the failed Psychic Scourge project that previously used the power source. During this time, Imurah, now mutated in the warp, physically reached out to tech priest Marneus Luz, apprentice to project head Arch-Magos Nosik Beta 12. Imurah silently watched and manipulated Luz, implanting thoughts into Luz's head that the tech priest mistook for his own, driving Luz to treat the project as his part of the quest for knowledge, a core mission of the cult Mechanicus. Through an oblivious Luz, Imurah found that Project Aurora was in truth built from Necron technology on the still dormant tomb world of Demirium, and technology could both nullify and amplify warp energies based on its polarity. The Fourth Tyrannic War raged across the galaxy in the wake of the 13th Black Crusade, and the opening of the Great Rift and the Tyranid menace soon invaded the Residius system, where Demirium and Project Aurora were located. While the ravenous Xenos invaded Kadaku, an imperial jungle world where Nosik stored most of Aurora's data, Imurah began sending cultists to the surface, disguised as soldiers of the 8th Cadian Regiment sent to the planet. Nosik was eventually evacuated from Kadaku by Titus, an ultramarine hero who had initially destroyed the warp power source on Graia. But Imurah had his followers take down the Thunderhawk gunship Nosik was on, killing the Arch-Magos and leaving the crash site full of chaos symbols, including Imurah's name written in blood on the vessel's side. However, the power source fragment was left untouched in its containment case as part of the plan to eventually hijack Aurora. Now folks, with Nosik dead, the only one who could continue the project was Luz, who was still under Imurah's influence. Right on cue, the Ultramarines deployed to secure Luz, who was on the Hive world Avarax, also being invaded by Tyranid, but not before Titus discovered the truth about Project Aurora, only to run into Chaos cultists, Thousand Sun sorcerers, and Rubicon Marines that Imurah had summoned to Avarax, seemingly to capture or eliminate Luz first. After rescuing Luz from the bunker besieged by Thousand Sun's forces, Titus tried to warn Marneus Calgar against using Aurora, knowing it could be used to open warp rifts capable of bringing in enough Chaos forces to overrun systems. However, the astropathic relay that Titus planned to use to send the message was surrounded by Tyranids, and Imurah began a ritual to summon a Lord of Change through a host in the structure, cutting off Voxcorms. However, other Ultramarine squads managed to slay the Tyranid Hive Tyrant to cripple the Xenoforce and slew the demon host, banishing its Lord of Change back to the warp and re-establishing communications. Titus tried to use that window to contact Calgar via the relay's chief astropath Neoma. However, when Neoma accessed the warp to send the message, Imurah struck by possessing Neoma, making her screech that Titus was a traitor who sought to assassinate Calgar. This led to Titus's already skeptical subordinate Sergeant Gadriel to turn on Titus under Imurah's influence. The pair struggling before Titus's other subordinate, Chairon, shot Neoma, killing her. Imurah then physically manifested from Neoma's body, taunting Titus before engaging the Ultramarines in combat. While powerful with teleportation and sorcery, he was unable to slay the Ultramarines and instead retreated to the warp. However, Imurah had already managed to open warp rifts across the Residius system, allowing more Thousand Sun sorcerers, Zangors, cultists, and Rubicon Marines to flood into the system's planets in a massive invasion, focused on attacking the completion project of Aurora on Demirium, as Luz had already been sent there while Titus was trying to send the warning. On Demirium, Imurah erected a warp beacon and a pillar that channeled warp energies to further power the heretics. He was like Wanda of the Warhammer universe. With his forces pouring onto the planet, Imurah quickly captured the facility where Aurora was housed. In the depths of the Necron tombs, a series of monoliths shaped vaguely like a double-bladed knife. Luz sealed himself in the heart of Aurora, powering up the weapon without Mechanicus' sanction, in a bid to stop the heretics. Titus reconciled with Gadriel, then landed on Demirium with Gadriel and Titus as the Ultramarine Second Company deployed all available forces to stop the Chaos advance. As Titus made his way to the empowering portal to plant a targeting beacon, killing all heretics and demons before him, Imurah corrupted their vox comms with ghostly whispers to disorient and confuse them. But Titus managed to plant the beacon regardless. This allowed the Ultramarines to pilot an ancient battle barge to ram the empowering pillar, destroying it and weakening the heretical forces. Imurah then physically manifested over Luz and tried to smite him with warp lightning, which was deflected by the anti-warp shield, making Luz laugh that Imurah's energies were useless. The Ultramarines then fired at Imurah, who deflected their attacks with his own shield, and then summoned a Thousand Suns Hellbrute to deal with the Ultramarines, a Dreadnought meant to carry its mutilated Astartes pilot to service even in death, but twisted by chaos into a feral berserker with flesh growing over the mechanical shell. The Hellbrute fought with unbridled savagery, but the Ultramarines were able to evade it and wear it down with continuous fire, making Imurah shout at the Hellbrute to fight harder, insulting its incompetence and demanding more power. The Hellbrute was eventually slain by Titus just as Luz fired Aurora's full power, revealing a levitating Necron obelisk that seemingly cast Imurah back to the warp. However, as Luz excitedly explained how the technology could banish chaos from the galaxy, Imurah's laughter echoed throughout the chamber before he deactivated Luz's shield and revealed that he was the true source of Luz's inspiration. Imurah then rematerialized and killed Luz with a blast of warp lightning, blocking bolter fire from the Ultramarines before teleporting away with the power source and Aurora controls, also making the chamber collapse on Titus and his companions. As it turns out, Imurah's secret influence over Luz had made Luz turn the weapon into a warp amplifier, achieved via inverting the polarities of the Necron obelisk. Everything had been part of Imurah's scheme. He murdered Nosik to make it seem as if Luz would be targeted next, then orchestrated the attack on Avarax specifically to draw the Ultramarines into retrieving Luz, and in turn left the power source fragment in Imperial hands so that it would be handed over to Luz and taken to Aurora, tricking the Ultramarines into delivering Luz right to where Imurah wanted him, and finally made it appear that Aurora was working as intended just to trick Luz into activating its full power. As Titus and his companions dug themselves out of the rubble, Imurah scrambled their vox comms with his insane laughter. Imurah then commanded the Lord of Change to attack, making it cast a blast of warp energy that slowed time, enabling Imurah to create a rift to escape into the warp. Calgar, immune to the time slow due to the chaos-resistant field generated by his iron halo, chased Imurah into the warp, followed by Titus, Chairon, and Gadriel right into a trap. As it turns out, the entire scheme to capture Aurora had the true purpose of imprisoning Calgar in the warp, just as Imurah was. Now that Calgar was in the warp, Imurah locked him in a subdimension of the warp where Calgar was assaulted by endless waves of Zangors and Rubicon Marines, and Titus and his squad were instead deposited on a strange floating structure resembling time-frozen dioramas of the battle on Demirium. As Titus reached for Calgar, Imurah telepathically declared that the Immaterium was his realm, one where time was laid out before the first mortal drew breath, and conjured illusions of Captain Akaran, Second Company Captain, telling Titus that Calgar abandoned him to the Inquisition as Titus had been imprisoned for years, following an accusation of heresy that the Ultramarines were unable to free him from. Titus rejected the vision and pressed on, finding Imurah at the controls of Aurora that he brought with him, standing before a giant reflection of the Aurora controller obelisk. However, as Imurah basked in the power of Aurora, Titus and his comrades surged forth through the dark realm towards Imurah, even as Imurah summoned more apparitions to battle them. Finally, the Ultramarines reached him, where Imurah simply summoned the wounded Lord of Change to stand against them. As Calgar, Chairon, and Gadriel held off the Demon Lord, Titus pushed through the agony of the sheer warp energy around the controls, climbing onto it even as Imurah declared that all the suffering of humanity in the name of the Emperor was for nothing. However, before the sorcerer could gloat further, Titus grabbed the exposed power source shard hovering over the controls and forcefully inverted it, while crushing it in his Kermatine gauntlets. Before Imurah could stop him, Aurora inverted the warp nullification, making the weapon implode while the power source was crushed to nothingness, cancelling out Imurah's energy and disintegrating him. The 4 Ultramarines were immediately transported back to Demirium, the Chaos Presence abruptly expelled, and believe me folks, there is still so much more to this battle, but you gotta experience it yourself in the game. Alright, let's continue. While playing Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, you might have heard the name Nosik Beta 12. Well, Nosik isn't your average secondary character. He has a very vital role in both the game and in the lore of Warhammer 40k universe. In Space Marines 2, he serves as the lead researcher on the mysterious project Aurora. Nosik is a high-ranking Arch-Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus and is over 800 years old. He's augmented with mechanical appendages and implants, leaving almost no human form remaining. Characteristically, for high-level tech priests, he is cold, logical, and possesses little patience for those he considers intellectually inferior. Nosik is the primary source of decodable Binaric countermessage in the early game. Having lived for over 800 years, Nosik has researched a level of cybernetic replacement where almost no organic flesh remains, as mentioned earlier in the video. Once more, this is typical for an Arch-Magos, as a cult Mechanicus believes that biological tissue is weak and should be replaced by holy steel. His name likely refers to a specific persona construct or lineage within his Forge World hierarchy, as many high-ranking Magi incorporate numerical and Greek letters to denote their rank and speciality. The Project Aurora, as mentioned previously, is Nosik's life's work. It was an attempt to weaponize the fragments of the power source recovered from the Forge World Graia. This device was the focal point of the first Space Marine game, and Nosik was obsessed with mastering it despite its chaos-linked origins. Some lore notes I read suggest that for much of his career, Nosik felt stifled by the restrictions placed on him by the wider Adeptus Mechanicus and the Inquisition. Project Aurora was his chance to prove his theories on warp-resistant technology, which eventually led him to a secret alliance or approval from Rabute Guilliman himself. His fate in Space Marine 2 was pretty much tragic. During the Tyranid's invasion of Kadaku, Nosik refuses to evacuate until critical research data is secured. While his evacuation gunship successfully departs, it crashes in Tyranid-held territory. Titus' squad eventually find Nosik's body and determines he was killed by Chaos forces that were the Thousand Sons rather than the Tyranid. After his death, his body is ceremonially buried by the Ultramarines to recover his sacred cybernetic augments. His apprentice, Maurius Luz, who is also mentioned previously, takes over the work on Project Aurora. We have been using the name Project Aurora repeatedly in this video, but what is this project actually? And why is it so important in this game? Well, in Space Marines 2, Project Aurora is the central plot device that bridges the narrative between the first game and the sequel. It represents the height of Adeptus Mechanicus hubris, the attempt to weaponize the warp using technology that once nearly destroyed the Imperium. The foundation of Project Aurora lies in the events in the Forge World Graia. Those of you who have played the original Space Marine might know that during the first game, Inquisitor Drogon, who was later revealed to be a puppet of the Chaos Lord, Nemroth, utilized a warp core artifact. This device was designed to draw energy from the Immaterium to power a psychic scourge weapon to kill orcs. Another crazy lore detail is that Project Aurora was intended to be a psychic resonance weapon. In theory, it would work by channeling a controlled burst of warp energy through a series of resonant emitters. The Mechanicus hoped to create a pulse that would sever the synaptic link of the Tyranid hive mind. This weapon utilized a massive array, the Aurora Array, to amplify the artifact's power. If successful, it would have instantly brain-deadened every Tyranid in the system. Most players think that Titus destroyed the project, but the actual tragedy of Project Aurora is that it was doomed before Titus even arrived on Kadaku. In reality, the Chaos Sorcerer Imurah, as discussed earlier in the video, had been manipulating the project from the shadows. He allowed the Mechanicus to rebuild the device because he needed theological precision to stabilize the artifact, something Chaos Magic struggles to do. Instead of Tyranid killing Pulse, the RA was used to tear a hole in reality, allowing the Thousand Suns to pull their flagship and an entire demon host directly into the system from the warp. The rest, you already know. How Titus and his squad destroyed and smashed the weapon. Most of you must have known by now that Titus isn't your regular Space Marine. Well, you're right, he's not. He is a Rubicon Primaris in Space Marine 2. Now, most of you might be wondering what a Rubicon Primaris is. We have dug up the Warhammer 40k universe lore to find out exactly what a Rubicon Primaris is, so just sit back and listen. The induction of the Primaris Marines into the Adeptus Astartes was not an easy process by any means. The chapters of the Space Marines are generally arch-traditionalists, and some are conservative in the extreme, having upheld the same warrior traditions for thousands of Terran years, and of course, the express command of Rabute Guilliman as the Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent eased the transition into the new era. For the Ultramarines and the vast majority of their successor chapters, the word of the arisen Primarch was good enough, and many chapters welcomed the Primaris Battle Brothers gladly. But there were those especially secretive or willful chapters who saw the incorporation of the Primaris Marines into their ranks as a dilution of their gene stock and a betrayal of their long-held culture. Some amongst the Adeptus Astartes suspected that the Primaris Marines, being stronger, more durable, and closer in blood to the Primarchs themselves, represented the obsolescence of the firstborn Astartes. No amount of reason in pointing out that what the Primaris offered in raw ability they lacked in experience and versatility could solve the spiritual wound dealt by the sight of the newcomers wearing their chapter heraldry. The Lords of the Ultramarines came to the conclusion that to ease the transition from centuries of imperial tradition to a new order, the theories of that raging debate needed to be put into practice. It was Marneus Calgar who stepped forward as the first test subject from the ranks of his storied chapter. It was a process he did not survive, though like his Primarch before him, he was to rise from the threshold of death once more. A Primaris Marine is gifted 3 new gene seed organs in addition to the 19 originally grafted, sutured, and chemically implanted into an aspirant Space Marine. These are the Magnificant, which is buried deep in the brain to stimulate growth and to intensify other organ functions. The Belisarian Furnace, which releases a burst of synthesized hypersteroids and corticostimulants when a mortal blow is dealt so the Primaris Marine may fight on. And the new sinew coils, cable-like lengths of durasteel that encase every tendon and sinew in a metallic sheath that gives tremendous resilience and strength. During the implantation of the Primaris organs, Marneus Calgar was cut open from crown to heel. His rib cage was cracked apart, and at the climax of the procedure, his physiology was suppressed to the point that his life slipped away. Choirs of cyber cherubs sang blissful, overlapping requiems, swaying the aspergillums so that sacred incense might guide Calgar's soul back to his body. The corpse lay in state, its flesh rent and open to the air, for what seemed to those watching like an age. 10 long solar minutes ticked past, then 20. Skull-faced surgeons clicked and muttered and stabbed at the chapter master's tortured flesh. Those around the periphery of the Apothecarium Theatre held their breath in dread. Then, with his wounds stitched closed by 1,000 jabbing needles and his mighty heart electrified to beat once more, the newly forged Marneus Calgar was brought back to life. He broke his bonds with a strangulated blood-flecked roar, stumbling to life as his newly implanted Belisarian furnace brought him to instant battle readiness. Calgar had clawed his way back from beyond the brink of death, and in doing so, he had shown his chapter and all Space Marines that the transformation was possible. The Rubicon Primaris had been crossed, and a new path opened for the Space Marines. In honor of his courage, the Ultramarines thereafter called the procedure the Calgarian Rites. One of the many unrecognized Easter eggs in Space Marines 2 is the Library of Lies. In the final mission, you can find floating fragments of parchment among the warp sparks. These represent pages from the Library of Lies. In Space Marines 2, the Library of Lies is not just a location, but a manifestation of the realm of Tzeentch, the Chaos God of Change. The final mission reference comes when the warp begins to bleed into reality, bringing elements of this twisted realm. What's so astonishing about this detail is that in Warhammer 40k lore, the library is a sunset of the Crystal Labyrinth within the Chaos realm. It contains every lie, half-truth, and false prophecy ever told in the history of the galaxy. Every time a person deceives another, a new volume or fragment of parchment is added. Now, why keep all these lies? Well, by manipulating these lies, the Tzeentch can steer the course of history without ever needing to use physical force. For a mortal, even a Space Marine entering or witnessing the library is physically corrosive. But then comes our hero Titus, who is uniquely resistant to the library's influence. This ties back to his warp resistance from the first game. While others might be driven mad by the whispers of the floating pages, Titus remains focused on his duty. In the game, when the environment shifts, you aren't just seeing magic. You are watching the physical laws of the universe being overwritten by Tzeentch. The floating parchments you see floating around the Thousand Sun sorcerers serve both as a source of power and a physical shield. You may notice the stairs that lead to nowhere and the floating islands. This represents the Crystal Labyrinth, where distance and direction are meaningless. The final boss, a greater demon of Tzeentch, is essentially the chief librarian of this manifestation. He acts as the direct conduit for Tzeentch's will on Demarium. Did you know that in Space Marine 2, the Binaric chatter heard on the battle barge and in various missions serves as a deep Easter egg that highlights the unique culture of the Adeptus Mechanicus? A notable Easter egg on the battle barge involves two tech priests engaging in what the developers described as talking smack about a servitor. They use Binaric to gossip openly in front of others, knowing that unaugmented humans and Space Marines cannot understand the data that are heavy bursts of static. Now, because Binaric can transmit a massive amount of data, including complex imagery and emotional context, in a fraction of a second, these tech priests can hold entire critical conversations about the flesh bags around them before a human could even finish a sentence. You can also sometimes find tech priests scolding malfunctioning servitors or machinery in Binaric. This is lore accurate, as they believe every machine has a machine spirit that can be appeased, coaxed, or rebuked into performing its duties correctly. This tongue also has some history, known formally as Cant-Mechicus. This language consists of high-pitched, non-random static bursts emitted through cybernetic vocal and neural implants. It is optimized for technical data and is practically impossible for your meaty vocal cords to replicate. In Space Marine 2, some of the visual Binaric code found on banners or computer screens actually translates into ASCII text. For example, one hidden line of code on the AdMech banner translates to the phrase, "Each one a sacred shrine," referencing the Mechanicus' view of machinery. While playing Space Marine 2, you might have noticed armor suit relics primarily within the Strategium and the Armory of Resilient, as well as the Shrine of the Shan during the campaign. These are the Mark III Iron Power Armor, a significant nod to the 10,000-year history of the Ultramarines and the broader Imperium. Why are they so important? Well, developed during the Great Crusade, the Mark III was never intended to replace the Mark II. Instead, it was specialized heavy-duty variant designed specifically for boarding actions and tunnel fighting where cover was non-existent. The suit is characterized by heavy reinforced plating on the front. This extra weight made it cumbersome for open field maneuvers but nearly impenetrable from the front, allowing Marines to walk through hails of fire in cramped corridors. The iconic sloped visor of the Mark III helmet was designed to deflect shrapnel and rounds away from the neck seal and optical lenses. In the 42nd millennium, Mark III armor is considered a holy relic. Only the most ancient chapters still possess functional suits. Seeing it on a battle barge tells us that the Ultramarines are dipping into their most prestigious vaults to honor the past. In the game, during the mission Servant of the Machine, you can find stone busts and statues wearing Mark III helmets. This serves as environmental storytelling, showing that the facility has been a bastion of the Imperium since the Horus Heresy era. One more small detail is that while the main campaign features Titus in Primaris MKX armor, you can unlock Mark III components, specifically the helmet and greaves, for your custom class in Operation mode. If you stand a custom Marine in Mark III armor next to Primaris Marine, you'll notice that Mark III suit is surprisingly larger. In lore, Firstborn armor like Mark III has to be heavily modified or upscaled to fit the larger frames of the new Primaris Space Marines. Saber did not disappoint us in giving the coolest small details. If you inspect the Mark III armor pieces in the customization menu, they feature a more rugged, bolted-on aesthetic compared to the sleek, modular look of Titus's Mark X Tacticus suit, emphasizing the brute force engineering of ancient Imperium. Chairon has a bolt chained around his pauldron, which is an award called the Marksman Honor. The golden case of the bolt shell is said to be one of the spent bolt cases from the weapon of the Ultramarines Primarch, Rubicon Primaris. These are awarded to Space Marines who have either performed an incredible feat in marksmanship or have exceptional accuracy with ranged weapons. What really makes this award interesting is that Chairon's weapon of choice in Space Marines 2 is a bolt rifle without a scope. Well, in the Warhammer 40k universe, a Space Marine's accuracy doesn't depend on a glass scope. Their power armor's autosensors and black carapace link their eyes directly to the machine spirit of the bolter. This creates a heads-up display inside their helmet, effectively giving them aimbot, or their universe's deadshot's position when firing from the hip. According to the Codex Space Marines, the shell used in the medal is often a relic fired by a legendary hero or the chapter's Primarch, Rubicon Primaris. Chairon wears it as a holy icon to appease the weapon's spirit, ensuring it never jams or misses. As an original, Chairon had more time than almost any living Marine to master the fundamentals of the bolt gun. He doesn't need a scope, because his muscle memory and neural links are perfected. If you use photo mode to look at the shell on his shoulder, you can see high Gothic inscriptions etched into the gold. This level confirms he is one of the company's elite Deadeyes. As we discussed previously, that Chairon is an awakened Primaris from the Horus Heresy era. When he loses his temper against the Thousand Suns, he screams about Calth. This is a reference to the betrayal at Calth, where the Wordbearer slaughtered his people 10,000 years ago, pointing out how tragic stories can turn you into fierce killing machines. Did you know that in Space Marine 2, the knife Titus uses for his brutal executions and close quarters combat is far more than just a standard weapon? It is a deadly personal relic that connects his past as Firstborn to his new life as a Primaris Marine. The most significant detail about this knife is revealed through external lore sources and subtle in-game nods. This is the original blade Titus was found with as a child, so you can guess what it means to Titus. Before he was an Ultramarine, Titus was a foundling discovered on a war-torn world by Sergeant Metaurus. The blade is the only physical object Titus possesses that predates his induction into the Adeptus Astartes. In a culture that values lineage and history, this knife represents Titus's own mysterious origins. As we all know, Titus underwent the Rubicon Primaris and his physical size increased significantly. To remain a functional weapon for his larger hands, the blade was likely re-hilted or reinforced, but the core metal remains the same ancient steel he held as a boy. The blade is modeled after the Ultima pattern combat blade. Unlike the massive chainsword or power sword, this knife is designed for silent killing and penetrating the weak joints of enemy armor, just like the hidden blade in the Assassin's Creed series. If you inspect the blade in the photo mode, you can see faint high Gothic etchings along the flat of the steel. These are likely prayers of sharpening or litanies of the strike, intended to appease the weapon's machine spirit. Another marvelous attention to detail by Sabers Interactives. You might have noticed that Titus carries the knife horizontally on the small of his back. This is a tactical choice often favored by veteran warriors because it allows for a quick draw with either hand during a grapple. The game gives us some of the most iconic scenes as the knife is used as the finishing move for the most lore-significant enemies in the game. In the climax, the knife is the tool he used to strike the final blow against the Thousand Sun sorcerer. There is a poetic irony here. A simple mortal blade, forged on a human world, is what ultimately ends the life of an ancient, warp-powered sorcerer who considers himself above physical reality. Another connection is that during the prologue, while Titus is still a black shield in the Deathwatch, the knife is painted matte black to avoid reflections during stealth missions. Once he rejoins the Ultramarines, the blade is cleaned back to its original polished steel. In the Operation mode, the Vanguard class uses a similar combat knife as its melee weapon. However, Titus's knife in the campaign has a unique model that distinguishes it as a personal relic rather than standard issue gear. But these knives are no joke. In the Warhammer 40k universe, these knives are often made of monomolecular edged carbon steel or ceramite-tipped alloys, allowing them to cut through Tyranid chitin and even light vehicle plating. To end the video, I thought it would be good to mention some small facts and secrets that were too short to be given proper time in this video. But they are definitely interesting and can even change your perspective on the game. Another small detail that might go unnoticed outside of the photo mode is that Titus typically closes one of his eyes while aiming. This is done regardless of whether a weapon is scoped or just has iron sights, but it's typically done to improve accuracy. While it's not totally clear whether Titus actually needs to do this, given all the sensors, targeting devices, and heightened senses that he has as a space marine, it surely couldn't hurt his accuracy either. Another detail is that while the normal foot soldiers in the Astra Militarum are considered to be cannon fodder, that doesn't mean that you can't save a few lives while on the battlefield. For example, in the instance of the game, a soldier typically gets gunned down, but if you take out the enemy or stun them before they get shot off, he lives. This shows that you can be a guardian angel in a few places where you fight alongside these soldiers, although many of them won't live to fight another day. Relating back to the Cadian Purple Eyes in a campaign scene, some Thousand Sons heretics pretend to be part of the Astra Militarum in a cutscene. This is a very small detail that might not be pointed out. The soldier talking directly to Titus clearly doesn't have purple eyes, showing that he isn't really a member of the Cadian regiment. This is revealed during the scene that they are traitors. This also means that these are soldiers who stole uniforms as opposed to actual Cadians who defected. Captain Sevastus Acheran can be seen on the battle barge's bridge, giving you and the other Ultramarines orders. His appearance is clearly modeled after the physical Warhammer model, the unnamed Primaris captain. This model doesn't share the same name as Sevastus, but the resemblance is far too similar for it to be a coincidence. He also has a Scottish accent, which matches his name as well. For those of you wondering, Ac is a Scottish exclamation, meaning surprise, frustration, or even excitement in some cases. This combination with the Scottish accent feels intentional. During one scene, a cultist in disguise detonates a bomb and kills the Ultramarine Varelis. Upon returning to the battle barge, you can walk by his quarters where a dedication has been laid for him. and his battle brothers are sharing stories about the brave sergeant. This is a nice reference to a wider 40k galaxy with a mention of the Tau, but also a humbling dedication to a space marine we all knew all too briefly. While walking by some members of the Astra Militarum, one of the troopers utters "Emperor's Teeth," taking the good name of the Emperor in vain, which is overheard by the squad, resulting in some admonishment by his brothers. During the mission Void Song, a blocked door is forced open by a Chimera armored transport crashing its way through it, something the gunner was obviously warned of. The attention to detail here is that the vehicle's turret-mounted multi-laser isn't damaged. They turned the barrel 180 degrees away from the door. When reloading a bolt rifle, if you pause at the right time, you can see the ejected magazines are actually modeled as empty, while fresh ones have visible bolt rounds inside. Some firearms have an inscription written in High Gothic that is visible in the scope. If you translate, you get some poetic messages. "Death to me is art," a reference that likely refers to the Space Marine pledge of their craft being death. You may have noticed that Zangors have many features. This is a common visual element for those worshipping Tzeentch, but what you might not have noticed is that unmutated human followers also have physical dedication. Some of them have gas masks and hoods that appear as though they have a beak. If you keep an eye on the Thousand Sun sorcerers, you can spot them reforming the discarded piles of dust and armor back into Rubicon Marines. This is something that has occurred in the Warhammer 40k lore, but it is a tricky and dangerous ritual to accomplish, as it involves literally fetching a soul from the warp and rebinding it with the armor. Waging war against Tyranids and crushing them down to their last fiber is a tiring affair, but luckily, workers and soldiers are provided with plenty of coffee and caffeine supplements to keep their energy levels up, or recaf as they call it in 40k. In Warhammer 40k, Astra Militarum commissars are responsible for troop morale and loyalty. This is a job that is taken extremely seriously, as it is not uncommon for them to evacuate wavering soldiers or inept officers, regardless of rank. If you're caught retreating by a commissar, the last thing you feel is likely a laser blast in your back. And yet, at the beginning of the Mechanicus Divinitas campaign, as the Astra Militarum battles to hold off Tyranid waves using tanks and emplaced weapons, you can see a commissar yell, "Hold the line," and then cheese it, running from the battle. It is extremely rare for a commissar to show their back to the enemy, as their role requires them to be on the front lines. You could say he's off to deliver a message, but he could command any trooper to be a messenger, and there are radios in those Leman Russ tanks. Unless he's Caiaphas Cain himself, he's going to have some explaining to do. If you jump back onto one of the platforms on the battle barge, you can find two servitors standing over the body of a deceased tech priest. Servitors are mind-wiped human and machines. It appears that the tech priest in charge of these servitors has perished, and without their commands, it's likely that these servitors will simply stand in place forever, or at least until they are found, rot away, or run out of fuel. Such is the weight, bulk, and strength of a space marine that they don't even need to fire a gun or swing a chainsword to dispatch lesser foes. Every punch or kick from an Astartes is a weapon of mass destruction, and you can see this across the campaign when coming up against human cultists. You can simply sprint right through them, turning these heretics into a fine paste under your boots, just like what happens to A-Train in the opening scene of The Boys. One of the harrowing details that really drives home the grimdark nature of 40k is that prior to meeting the astropath, you can see psykers throughout the hall formed into an astropathic choir. These are used to amplify the psychic strength of an astropath, essentially using their psychic power to boost a telepathic signal. You can see a few signs of corruption appear here, and the falling objects around you are the bodies of burnt-out psykers. This happened due to the stress of interacting with the warp. Their souls and bodies have all been broken by the stresses of the immaterium. On a more humorous note though, the Space Marine Fortress isn't a safe place to work. If you look into Long Bay, you might see a priest working away in gunship. When you return from missions, you will notice that one of the lads has met his fate in an unfortunate accident. A highly requested feature for Space Marine 2 was the option to always have your helmet on during the campaign for a more immersive experience. If you immediately threw this option on, you may not have noticed that the characters' voices are modulated as if they are speaking through their helmet's vox. This changes depending on if they are wearing helmets or not, so it may not have stuck out if you chose to keep those helmets on at all times. If you hold up on the D-pad, you can issue pings and commands, but there are also some voice lines in here that you can activate as well, one of which includes a nice little reference in "The Codex is a guild" line. But the Gadriel also makes a small reference when the squad plans to launch from their ship using a jump pack. Now folks, if you enjoyed this one and you are a big fan of Warhammer lore, I suggest watching the 2 hours of Dawn of War Facts video that's on your screen right now. Click it and I'll see you there. And one more thing. In all this speaking, I appear to have been afflicted with some form of headache. However, the blood of these foul Xenos is a fine tonic.